The village of Mizara. The village of Mizara was a tranquil place, nestled in the arms of rolling green hills and bordered by a dense, ancient forest that seemed to hum with secrets. It was a place where time moved slowly, and life revolved around the rhythms of nature. Farmers tilled their fields at sunrise, children played in the dusty paths, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air from the village ovens. Mizara was peaceful, but it carried an air of mystery. The villagers often whispered about strange occurrences, ancient traditions, and the enigmatic spirits believed to reside in the nearby woods. Among the villagers was Amina, a young woman with a heart as kind as her hands were skilled. Amina was known for her dedication to her family, especially to her younger siblings, whom she cared for after the tragic loss of their parents. She worked tirelessly as a seamstress, mending clothes and crafting intricate fabrics for the village. Despite her hardships, Amina had dreams that stretched far beyond the boundaries of Mizara. She often gazed at the horizon, imagining a life where she could build something greater for herself and her family. Amina lived with her younger siblings and her wise grandmother, Seo, in a modest clay house on the edge of the village. Seo, with her silver hair and deep, knowing eyes, was a repository of the village's history and traditions. She often sat by the fire in the evenings, weaving tales of caution and wisdom that both intrigued and frightened Amina. "Remember, my child," Seo would say, her voice carrying the weight of generations, "the forest holds many secrets, and the village carries its own. Not everything that appears kind is good, and not everything that tempts you is worth having." Amina would listen intently, though she often felt that her grandmother's stories were relics of a bygone era. The world, she thought, had surely moved past such superstitions. But deep in her heart, she respected her grandmother's words, knowing that Seo's wisdom came from a life filled with both joy and hardship. One ordinary morning, the tranquility of Mizara was disrupted by a surprising announcement. A new family had arrived in the village, setting up a restaurant in the heart of the town square. The villagers were abuzz with curiosity. Mizara was not the sort of place where businesses sprang up overnight, especially not something as elaborate as a restaurant. Most of the villagers preferred their simple home-cooked meals and saw little reason for such an establishment. The restaurant itself was an imposing structure, built quickly and with materials that seemed foreign to the village. Its walls were smooth and gleamed under the sunlight, unlike the earthen homes surrounding it. A large wooden sign hung above the entrance, bearing the name "The Golden Feast" in elegant script. The aroma wafting from the building was intoxicating, a rich blend of spices and roasted meats that seemed to call out to anyone passing by. Amina passed by the restaurant on her way to the market, her basket of fabric swaying at her side. She paused for a moment, staring at the building. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, and the smells made her stomach rumble. She hadn't eaten much that morning, saving what little food they had for her siblings. "Amina," a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Kofi, her childhood friend and the village blacksmith, approaching with his usual cheerful grin. "What do you think of the new place?" he asked, nodding toward the restaurant. "It's strange," Amina admitted. "It feels out of place here." Kofi shrugged. "Maybe, but it smells amazing. I hear the food is like nothing anyone has ever tasted. Some of the villagers are already talking about trying it." Amina frowned. "It feels too sudden. Why would a family open something so grand here? Mizara isn't exactly a bustling town." Kofi chuckled. "You're always so suspicious. Maybe they just saw an opportunity. Besides, it's just food. What's the harm in that?" Amina didn't reply, but her unease lingered. Something about the restaurant didn't sit right with her. She had learned to trust her instincts, and they were whispering that the Golden Feast was not as innocent as it seemed. That evening, as the village buzzed with talk of the new restaurant, Amina sat by the fire with her grandmother. Seo, as if sensing Amina's thoughts, began to speak. Do you remember the tale of the enchanted banquet? Seo asked, her voice low and deliberate. Amina shook her head. No, grandmother. Seo leaned forward, her silver hair catching the firelight. It is an old story, passed down from our ancestors. It tells of a traveling merchant who set up a grand feast in a village much like ours. The food was unlike anything the villagers had ever tasted, delicious, irresistible. But those who ate it found themselves bound to the merchant, unable to live or think for themselves. The merchant was no ordinary man but a spirit in disguise, feeding on the souls of those who fell into his trap. Amina shivered, the story sending a chill down her spine. Do you think this restaurant could be like that? Seo's eyes narrowed. I do not know, child. But it is wise to be cautious. Not everything that glitters is gold. As the fire crackled between them, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that her grandmother's story was more than just a cautionary tale. She resolved to keep her distance from the restaurant, though her curiosity gnawed at her. Little did she know, her life, and the life of everyone in Mizera, was about to change forever. The golden feast had arrived, and its secrets would soon unravel, bringing both temptation and danger to their quiet village. Amina's struggle. The sun rose slowly over the village of Mizera, casting its golden light over the clay houses, bustling market, and dense forest that surrounded the small settlement. For Amina, it marked the beginning of another long day. Life had not been easy since her parents passed away unexpectedly 2 years ago, leaving her as the sole provider for her younger siblings, Tay and Zora. At only 22 years old, Amina had taken on the role of caregiver, working tirelessly as a seamstress to ensure her family's survival. Amina's small workshop was a simple corner of their modest home. Scraps of fabric and threads of every color were scattered across her wooden table, while a worn sewing machine stood in the center, its metal gleaming in the morning light. Her hands were calloused from years of work, but her skill was unmatched. Villagers would come to her with torn garments, wedding attire, and market cloth, trusting her to create and repair with precision and care. Despite her efforts, it was a constant struggle to make ends meet. Some days, there was barely enough money to buy food for her siblings. Yet, Amina remained resilient. Her siblings' laughter and smiles gave her strength, and her dreams of a better future kept her going. That morning, as Amina worked on a brightly colored dress for a customer, Tay and Zora played in the corner, giggling as they built small towers out of discarded fabric rolls. Amina couldn't help but smile at their joy, even as the weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders. The peace of the morning was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps outside. Amina looked up to see her best friend, Kofi, entering the house. His broad shoulders and ever-present grin usually brought an air of reassurance, but today, there was a shadow of worry on his face. Amina, have you heard? He asked, his voice low. Heard what? Amina set her sewing aside, giving him her full attention. Kofi leaned against the doorframe, lowering his voice so the children wouldn't overhear. It's about that new restaurant, the Golden Feast. Amina frowned. What about it? Kofi glanced over his shoulder, as if afraid someone might be listening. I've been hearing some strange things from the villagers who've eaten there. They say the food is unlike anything they've ever tasted, so good that they can't stop thinking about it. Some people have started going there every day, even spending money they don't have just to eat there. Amina folded her arms, her unease growing. That doesn't sound too strange. Maybe the food is just really good. That's what I thought too, at first, Kofi said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But there's more. Some of them, they're acting different. Distant. Like they're not fully themselves anymore. One of the farmers, Baba Kolu, hasn't been seen in 2 days. People say he was last spotted at the restaurant. Amina's eyes widened. Are you sure? That's a serious claim, Kofi. He nodded solemnly. I didn't want to believe it either, but I've heard similar stories from neighboring villages. There was a place like this that opened in Elosa last year. People flocked to it, but then they started disappearing. The restaurant vanished overnight, leaving no trace. The villagers said the owners weren't human. Amina shivered at his words, recalling her grandmother's warning about the enchanted banquet. Do you think it's the same thing? I don't know, Kofi admitted. But I do know one thing, you should stay away from that place, Amina. Promise me you won't go there. Amina hesitated, the aroma from the restaurant lingering in her memory. The rich, tantalizing scent of roasted meats and exotic spices had been almost impossible to resist as she passed by the day before. But Kofi's concern was genuine, and she trusted his judgment. I promise, she said, though a seed of curiosity had already taken root in her mind. Kofi nodded, relief washing over his face. Good. Just be careful. Something about this doesn't feel right. As Kofi left, Amina returned to her work, but her thoughts were clouded with unease. Rumors about the golden feast continued to spread through the village like wildfire. Some praised it as a blessing, claiming the food was worth every coin. Others whispered of strange occurrences, people becoming sick, losing weight rapidly, or vanishing altogether. That afternoon, as Amina walked to the market to gather supplies, she noticed a crowd outside the golden feast. Villagers stood in line, their faces filled with anticipation. The door opened, and the alluring aroma spilled out, stronger than ever. Amina's stomach growled, and she found herself taking a step closer before stopping herself. Not everything that tempts you is worth having, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Amina turned away, quickening her pace toward the market. She refused to let her curiosity override her better judgment. But as she walked, she couldn't ignore the nagging question in the back of her mind, what was it about the golden feast that had such a hold on people? That evening, Amina shared her concerns with her grandmother, Seo, as they sat by the fire. The elder woman listened intently, her face thoughtful. It seems the tales of old are finding new life, Seo said at last. But the spirits of greed and deception never truly left, my child. They only take new forms. You must trust your instincts and avoid the golden feast. I will, grandmother, Amina promised. But what about the others? What if something terrible is happening, and no one realizes it until it's too late? Seo's expression darkened. Then the village must be reminded of the old ways, of caution, of respect for what cannot be seen. But that is not your burden to bear, Amina. Your task is to protect yourself and your family. Amina nodded, though her heart felt heavy. As she lay awake that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Golden Feast was more than just a restaurant. It was a mystery, one that demanded answers. But how far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? The scent of its food lingered in her memory, tantalizing and persistent, as though calling to her. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Amina realized that the Golden Feast had already begun to weave its spell, not just on the village, but on her as well. The temptation. The days passed, and the Golden Feast continued to grow in popularity. By now, nearly every family in the village of Mizera had visited at least once. Stories of the restaurant's food filled the air like whispers carried on the wind. Some claimed the dishes were crafted by the hands of gods, while others murmured about strange dreams and an unexplainable longing to return after just one meal. For Amina, the temptation was becoming harder to ignore. Her earnings as a seamstress were meager, and despite her best efforts, there were days when food in the house was scarce. She often skipped meals so her younger siblings, Tay and Zora, could eat. Hunger clawed at her stomach as she sat by her sewing machine, trying to focus on her work, but the thought of the Golden Feast lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, As Amina returned from delivering a finished garment to a customer, the tantalizing aroma from the restaurant filled the air. She had avoided walking past it for days, but this time, her path led her dangerously close. The scent was intoxicating, a rich blend of roasted spices, simmering broths, and sweet, smoky undertones that seemed to wrap around her like a warm embrace. Her steps slowed as she approached the restaurant. Amina stopped at the edge of the bustling crowd, her eyes scanning the faces of the people waiting in line. There was something unusual about them, an expression she couldn't quite place. They looked eager, yes, but there was a glassy, distant quality to their eyes, as if they were under some kind of spell. She watched as a man stepped out of the restaurant, holding a small bundle wrapped in leaves. He took a bite and froze, his face melting into an expression of pure bliss. His hands trembled as he devoured the rest of the meal in a frenzy, as though he hadn't eaten in days. Amina's stomach churned, not just from hunger, but from unease. The door of the restaurant swung open, and a server stepped out carrying another platter. The scent grew stronger, and Amina's resolve wavered. She clenched her fist, willing herself to move, to walk away. But her feet remained planted, her body unwilling to leave the magnetic pull of the aroma. Amina, a voice broke through her trance. She turned sharply to see Kofi standing behind her, his brows furrowed in concern. He glanced between her and the restaurant, a knowing look in his eyes. "You weren't about to go in there, were you?" "No," Amina said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. Kofi stepped closer, his expression serious. "You shouldn't even be standing here. I told you, there's something wrong with that place." "I wasn't going to go in," she insisted, though the words felt hollow. I was curious, that's all." Kofi sighed, running a hand through his short, curly hair. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Amina. I've been watching what's happening, and it's not just rumors anymore. People are changing. My neighbor, Adoma, she used to laugh and chat with everyone in the village. Now, all she does is talk about the food. She doesn't leave her house unless it's to go back to that restaurant." Amina frowned. "But what could it be? It's just food, isn't it?" "That's what they want us to think," Kofi said, lowering his voice. "I've heard whispers, Amina. Some say the food is enchanted, that it steals a piece of your soul with every bite. Others think the owners are using dark magic to control the village." "Magic?" Amina's tone was skeptical, but her unease grew. She thought of her grandmother's warnings, the cautionary tales that seemed to echo louder with each passing day. "Please, Amina," Kofi said, his voice earnest. "Promise me you'll stay away." Amina hesitated, glancing back at the restaurant. The aroma was almost overpowering now, each breath filling her with a longing she couldn't explain. But Kofi's concern was genuine, and she trusted him more than anyone else in the village. "I promise," she said, though the words felt like a fragile shield against the temptation gnawing at her resolve. Kofi nodded, relief softening his features. "Good. Now, let's get out of here before they notice us." As they walked away, Amina cast one last glance over her shoulder. The crowd outside the Golden Feast seemed to pose like a living thing, their movements almost mechanical as they shuffled forward in line. A chill ran down her spine. That night, Amina sat by the fire with her grandmother, Seo, as her siblings played quietly in the corner. She didn't mention her encounter at the restaurant, but the unease in her chest must have been evident because Seo spoke without prompting. "You've been troubled, my child," Seo said, her voice calm but probing. "Is it the Golden Feast?" Amina nodded slowly. "I don't understand it, grandmother. It's just a restaurant, but it doesn't feel right. The way people act, the way the food smells, it's like it's calling to you." Seo's eyes darkened, her gaze steady. "It is calling to you, Amina. But not for the reasons you think. There are forces in this world that feed on desire and weakness, and they often disguise themselves as things we cannot resist. Food, wealth, beauty, all of these can be traps if we are not careful. Amina swallowed hard, her grandmother's words stirring something deep within her. What should I do? Stay strong, Seo said simply. The more you resist, the weaker its hold on you will become. But beware, child. Temptation is persistent. It will find ways to test you. Amina nodded, though the knot in her stomach remained. As she lay in bed that night, the scent of the golden feast seemed to linger in her memory, vivid and tantalizing. She clenched her fist beneath the covers, vowing to keep her promise to Kofi and Seo. But deep down, Amina knew this was only the beginning. The Golden Feast was no ordinary restaurant, and its pull on her, and the entire village, was growing stronger by the day. The warning. The evening air was heavy with the lingering warmth of the day as Amina sat on the worn stool by the fire, stitching a patch onto Tay's shirt. The faint crackle of the flames filled the quiet room, but her mind was far from calm. Ever since she had walked past the Golden Feast earlier that day, its intoxicating aroma had haunted her. It was as though the scent had planted itself in her thoughts, tugging at her willpower in moments of weakness. Her grandmother, Seo, watched her from her seat by the fire, her wise eyes narrowing as she noticed the distracted look on Amina's face. Seo had always been attuned to the moods of her family, and tonight Amina's unease was as clear as the stars outside. "What weighs on your heart, child?" Seo asked softly, setting down the small wooden bowl she had been carving. Amina hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-stitch. She didn't want to worry her grandmother, but the Golden Feast had a grip on her thoughts that she couldn't shake. Finally, she sighed and set the shirt aside. "It's that restaurant, grandmother. The Golden Feast." Seo's expression darkened. She shifted in her seat, leaning closer to the firelight. "What about it, Amina?" "I don't know," Amina admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's strange. Everyone talks about how wonderful the food is, how they can't stop thinking about it once they've eaten there. But Kofi says there's something wrong with it, something unnatural." Seo's eyes hardened. "Kofi is a wise young man. You would do well to listen to him." Amina nodded but didn't meet her grandmother's gaze. "It's just the smell, grandmother. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. It's so tempting. I've been so hungry lately, and the idea of tasting something like that just once feels harmless." Seo straightened in her seat, her voice gaining a stern edge. "Harmless. That temptation is exactly what makes it dangerous. Do you not remember the tales I've told you, child? About the spirits who prey on the weak and the desperate?" Amina frowned. "I remember. But those are just stories, aren't they?" Seo's gaze bore into her, unyielding. "Stories carry truth, Amina. They are warnings passed down through generations. And you are not the first in this family to face such temptation." Amina blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Seo leaned back, her expression distant as though recalling a memory long buried. The flickering firelight cast shadows across her lined face, making her seem even more otherworldly. "When I was a young woman, not much older than you, a similar thing happened in this village. A traveling merchant arrived, setting up a grand feast that drew everyone in. The food was extraordinary, so they said, rich, flavorful, and unlike anything the villagers had ever tasted." Amina leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What happened?" Seo's voice dropped, her words measured and heavy. "At first, the villagers were delighted. They flocked to the feast day after day, spending their hard-earned coins and even trading their belongings to get more. But soon, strange things began to happen. Those who ate the food became listless, as though they were no longer themselves. They stopped tending to their fields, their homes, their families. All they cared about was the food. Amina's heart quickened. What did you do? I stayed away, Seo said firmly. My mother warned me, just as I am warning you now. She told me that the food was cursed, meant to ensnare and control those who gave in to their hunger. She said the merchant wasn't human, but a spirit feeding on the souls of the desperate. I didn't believe her at first, but then I saw it with my own eyes. Seo paused, her voice thick with emotion. One night, I followed the merchants to the edge of the forest, curious about the truth. What I saw still haunts me. The merchant stood under the light of the full moon, his true form revealed. He was not a man, but a twisted, shadowy creature, his hands glowing as he absorbed the life force of the villagers who had eaten his food. They didn't even realize they were being drained. Amina shuddered, goosebumps rising on her arms. What happened to the village? The elders banded together to confront the creature, Seo continued. They destroyed the feast and drove the spirit away, but the damage had already been done. Many villagers were left weak and sickly, some never recovering. It was a lesson our people have not forgotten until now. Amina swallowed hard, her grandmother's tale sending a chill down her spine. Do you think the golden feast is the same? Seo's gaze was sharp and unyielding. I cannot say for certain, but it carries the same stench of deceit and danger. Whatever it is, it feeds on temptation. And that, child, is its weapon. It will try to lure you in with promises of satisfaction and relief, but once it has you, it will not let go. Amina sat in silence, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and doubt. The story was terrifying, but a part of her still struggled to reconcile it with the alluring aroma she had smelled outside the golden feast. Could something so delicious truly be so dangerous? But, grandmother, Amina said hesitantly, what if I'm wrong? What if it's just a restaurant? Seo's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. Then you lose nothing by staying away. But if you're right, you lose everything. Is that a risk you are willing to take? Amina lowered her gaze, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. The hunger gnawed at her, and the memory of the food scent lingered like a whisper in her mind. But her grandmother's words weighed heavily on her heart, a warning she couldn't ignore. That night, as Amina lay in bed, the temptation felt stronger than ever. The golden feast seemed to call to her, its pull growing with each passing moment. She clenched her fist, repeating her grandmother's words like a mantra, not everything that tempts you is worth having. But deep down, Amina knew that the battle was far from over. The allure of the golden feast was like a fire in the distance, and no matter how much she tried to resist, its light continued to flicker in her mind, drawing her closer to the edge. The invitation. The morning sun rose sluggishly over the village of Mizera, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. For days, Amina had done her best to avoid walking past the golden feast. She had taken the long way to the market, worked tirelessly to keep her mind occupied, and listened to her grandmother's stories to strengthen her resolve. But the pull of the mysterious restaurant was relentless, like a thread woven tightly around her thoughts. That day, however, Amina found herself standing in front of the golden feast once more. She had gone to deliver a dress to a wealthy customer whose home was near the restaurant, and the intoxicating aroma hit her before she even rounded the corner. Her stomach grumbled, and despite her better judgment, she paused outside, drawn by the sounds of lively chatter and the tantalizing scent of roasting spices. The crowd outside the restaurant seemed larger than ever. Villagers from all corners of Mizera had gathered, their faces alight with anticipation. Some clutched small pouches of coins, while others whispered excitedly about their last meal there. Amina's gaze lingered on them, her curiosity battling with the warnings echoing in her mind. Amina, a voice called out, smooth and melodic. She turned sharply to see a tall, elegant woman standing in the doorway of the golden feast. The woman's presence was magnetic. Her rich, dark skin shimmered faintly in the sunlight, and her piercing amber eyes seemed to see straight through Amina. She was dressed in a flowing, golden robe adorned with intricate patterns that reflected the light, making her seem almost otherworldly. "You must be Amina," the woman said, her lips curling into a warm smile. "I've heard so much about you." Amina hesitated, her pulse quickening. "You know my name?" The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Of course. I make it my business to know all the remarkable people in this village. And you, my dear, are truly remarkable." "I'm sorry," Amina said, her voice faltering, "but I don't think we've met." The woman chuckled softly, the sound like the tinkling of wind chimes. "Where are my manners? I am Madame Colisa, the owner of the Golden Feast." She extended a hand, her long fingers adorned with golden rings that glinted in the sunlight. Amina shook her hand reluctantly, her skin prickling under Madame Colisa's cold touch. There was something unsettling about the woman's presence, though she couldn't quite place it. "It's an honor to meet you, Amina," Madame Colisa said, her smile never wavering. "I've been watching you, your skill, your dedication to your family. It's rare to see such strength and grace in one so young." Amina's cheeks flushed. "Thank you, but I'm just doing what anyone would do." "Nonsense," Madame Colisa said, her tone dripping with admiration. "You are extraordinary. And extraordinary people deserve extraordinary experiences." She gestured toward the restaurant, where the aroma of spices and roasted meats wafted out invitingly. "Please, allow me to treat you to a meal. On the house, of course. It's the least I can do for someone as special as you." Amina's stomach growled audibly at the offer, and she felt her resolve waver. The scent of the food was overwhelming, tugging at her willpower like an insistent whisper. But then she remembered Kofi's warnings and her grandmother's cautionary tales. The uneasy feeling in her chest flared, and she forced herself to step back. "That's very kind of you," Amina said carefully, "but I can't accept. I have work to do." Madame Colisa's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she recovered. "Work can wait, my dear. A meal like this is not something you should miss. Besides, you deserve a moment to relax, don't you?" Amina shook her head, summoning what little strength she had left. "I'm sorry, Madame Colisa. I really can't." The warmth in Madame Colisa's expression cooled, and her amber eyes seemed to darken. She tilted her head, studying Amina with a gaze that felt far too probing. "You are a curious one," she said softly. "Most people would jump at the chance to dine here, yet you hesitate. Why is that?" Amina swallowed hard, her palms growing clammy. I've heard things. Strange things." Madame Colisa's laugh was light and musical, but it carried a sharp edge. "Rumors, my dear. People love to invent stories about what they don't understand. The truth is much simpler. We provide the finest food in Misera, nothing more." Her gaze softened, and she reached out to place a hand on Amina's shoulder. "But I see potential in you, Amina. Great potential. And I don't give up so easily. The offer stands. When you're ready to accept, you'll always be welcome here." Amina nodded stiffly, the weight of Madame Colisa's words settling uneasily in her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Amina walked away, she felt Madame Colisa's gaze on her back, heavy and unrelenting. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The encounter had left her shaken, and the lure of the Golden Feast felt stronger than ever. That evening, she told her grandmother about what had happened. Seo's face darkened as she listened, her knotted hands clutching the edge of her chair. "She invited you in?" Seo asked, her voice tight with concern. Amina nodded. "She said she sees potential in me." Seo leaned forward, her expression grim. Amina, listen to me. That woman is not what she seems. She is testing you, trying to weaken your resolve. You must not give in. I didn't, Amina said quickly. I refused. Seo's gaze softened, though the worry in her eyes remained. Good. But be careful, child. Temptation will only grow stronger. You must stay vigilant. As Amina lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling of Madame Colissa's hand on her shoulder or the dark intensity of her gaze. The woman's words echoed in her mind, stirring a mix of fear and curiosity that refused to be silenced. For the first time, Amina began to wonder if resisting the golden feast would be as simple as she had hoped, or if she was already too deeply entangled in its web. The unraveling mystery. The days in Mizera had grown eerily quiet. Where the village once bustled with lively chatter and the laughter of children, now there was an unsettling stillness. Amina noticed it first in the market. Many of the regular vendors were absent, their stalls empty. Those who remained seemed oddly distant, their faces pale and drawn as if a heavy weight pressed upon them. The change was subtle at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The villagers who frequented the golden feast began behaving strangely. Their eyes, once bright with life, grew glassy and dull. They moved slowly, almost mechanically, and spoke in monotonous tones. Even their laughter, when it came, was hollow, devoid of any real joy. Amina observed them with a growing sense of unease. One day, she saw Adoma, her neighbor who had once been full of warmth and vitality, standing outside the restaurant. Adoma's hands trembled as she clutched a pouch of coins, her gaze fixed on the entrance. Her lips moved soundlessly, as though she were chanting a silent prayer. Amina called out to her, but Adoma didn't respond, walking into the restaurant as if in a trance. When Amina mentioned these changes to her grandmother, Seo, the elder woman's face grew grim. The signs are clear, child, she said. The golden feast is no ordinary place. It is draining the life from our people. But how? Amina asked, her voice trembling. How can food do something like that? Seo shook her head. Not food. Magic. The kind that preys on weakness and desire. Kofi's investigation. Determined to uncover the truth, Amina turned to Kofi, who had always been the voice of reason and caution. She found him in his workshop, hammering away at a piece of metal with an intensity that matched her urgency. Kofi, she began, her words stumbling out, something is wrong with the people who go to the golden feast. They're changing. It's like they're not even themselves anymore. Kofi wiped the sweat from his brow, his expression darkening. I've noticed too, he admitted. That's why I've been asking around. There are whispers, Amina, whispers about Madame Colissa. What kind of whispers? Amina pressed. Kofi lowered his voice, glancing around as if the walls themselves might listen. They say she's connected to a shadowy group that practices dark magic. An organization that moves from village to village, using enchantments to trap people. They drain their victims of life, leaving them as empty shells. Amina's stomach churned. How do you know this? I spoke to a traveler from Elosa, Kofi explained. He said something similar happened there. A restaurant appeared out of nowhere, promising the finest food anyone had ever tasted. People flocked to it, but soon they began to change. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The owners vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but ruin. Amina's hands clenched into fists. And now it's happening here. Kofi nodded. It's not just the food, Amina. It's enchanted. It doesn't just feed people, it feeds on them. Every bite they take drains a part of their life force. That's why they keep going back. The more they eat, the more they need. It's like an addiction. The chilling truth. Armed with this knowledge, Amina began watching the golden feast more closely. She stood at a distance, observing the villagers who entered and emerged from the restaurant. Each time, her unease grew. The people looked weaker with every visit, their once healthy complexions fading to a sickly pallor. One evening, she noticed something even more disturbing. As the restaurant's doors opened, a faint mist escaped, shimmering in the twilight like a living thing. It seemed to wrap around the patrons, clinging to them as they walked away. Amina shivered, her skin crawling with the certainty that the mist was more than it appeared. Unable to bear it any longer, Amina confronted her grandmother that night. "It's true, grandmother," she said, her voice trembling. "The restaurant is draining people. Kofi says the food is enchanted, and I've seen it with my own eyes. The villagers are wasting away." Seo nodded solemnly. "I feared as much. The spirits who practice such dark arts thrive on the despair and greed of mortals. They lure their victims with promises of pleasure, then feed on their essence until there is nothing left." Amina felt a surge of anger rise within her. "We have to stop it. We can't let Madame Colissa destroy our village." Seo placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It is not so simple, child. Such magic is powerful and deeply rooted. Confronting it directly would be dangerous. But we can't just do nothing," Amina exclaimed. "There must be a way." Seo's eyes narrowed in thought. "Perhaps there is. But it will require courage and cunning. If the restaurant's food is enchanted, then the source of its power must lie within its walls. To break the spell, you would need to uncover and destroy that source." Amina's heart pounded. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes, I'll do it." Seo's grip tightened. "You must be careful, Amina. Madame Colissa is not human. She will sense your intentions if you are not careful. And remember, once you step into her domain, you may not be able to live the same." A plan takes shape. That night, Amina and Kofi sat together under the light of the moon, whispering about what they had learned. Kofi was reluctant to let Amina take such a risk, but her determination was unwavering. "I can't just stand by while she destroys our people," Amina said firmly. "If there's even a chance we can stop her, I have to try." Kofi sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If you're going, you're not going alone. We'll figure this out together." Amina smiled faintly, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Kofi." As they sat in the stillness of the night, the distant glow of the golden feast flickered ominously in the darkness. It was a reminder of the danger that loomed over Mizera, a threat that demanded action. Together, Amina and Kofi began to devise a plan, one that would take them into the heart of the enemy's lair. But deep down, Amina knew the path ahead would not be easy. The restaurant's secrets were far darker than she had imagined, and the battle to save her village was only just beginning. The confrontation. The air in Mizera was heavy with tension, as though the village itself could sense the growing darkness. Amina had spent days observing the golden feast from a distance, her unease mounting with every passing moment. The changes in the villagers were undeniable. Faces once full of life were now pale and sunken, their movements sluggish as if weighed down by an invisible force. Despite the warnings of her grandmother, Seo, and her best friend, Kofi, Amina knew she could no longer stand idly by. She decided to confront Madame Colissa. The decision. That evening, Amina sat by the fire with Seo, the flickering flames casting shadows across the room. Seo's expression was stern, her eyes filled with worry as Amina explained her plan. "You can't do this alone, child," Seo said firmly. "Madame Colissa is not of this world. She wields powers far beyond your understanding." "I know, grandmother," Amina replied, her voice steady. "But if we don't stop her, our village will be destroyed. I can't let that happen." Seo sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her fears. If you are determined to go, you must remember this, her power lies in deception. Do not believe her words, no matter how tempting they may seem. And whatever you do, do not eat or drink anything she offers. Amina nodded, her resolve unshaken. I'll be careful. When she left her grandmother's house, the moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale glow over the village. Kofi met her at the edge of the square, his face etched with concern. I still don't think this is a good idea, he said, crossing his arms. She's dangerous, Amina. I know, Amina said, her voice soft but firm. But we have to stop her. I can't do nothing while she destroys our people. Kofi hesitated before sighing. Fine. But if you're going in there, I'm staying close by. If anything goes wrong, I'll be right outside. Amina managed a small smile. Thank you, Kofi. The confrontation. As Amina stepped through the ornate doors of the golden feast, the scent of roasted spices and rich flavors enveloped her, stronger than ever before. The restaurant was eerily quiet, the usual bustle of patrons replaced by an unsettling stillness. The golden walls seemed to shimmer faintly, as though alive with an unseen energy. Madame Colisa appeared from the shadows, her amber eyes gleaming as she approached. She was dressed in a flowing black gown embroidered with golden symbols, her presence as commanding as ever. Amina, she said smoothly, her lips curving into a smile. What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't sure you'd ever come. Amina forced herself to remain calm, her fist clenched at her sides. I want answers, Madame Colisa. I know you're behind what's happening to the villagers. Madame Colisa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Accusations, my dear? That's not very polite. I've only brought joy to this village, delicious food, satisfied customers. What more could anyone ask for? Don't lie to me, Amina snapped, her voice firm. I've seen what your food does to people. They are wasting away, becoming shadows of themselves. What are you doing to them? Madame Colisa's laughter filled the room, a cold and hollow sound that sent shivers down Amina's spine. Oh, my dear, you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. Very well, since you're so eager to know the truth. She raised her hands, and the air around her seemed to ripple. The golden walls darkened, their shimmering light replaced by an ominous red glow. The restaurant's tables and chairs vanished, leaving only an empty, cavernous space. A faint mist rose from the floor, swirling around Madame Colisa as she began to transform. Her elegant features contorted, her skin darkening to a deep, inky black that glistened like oil. Her eyes burned with a fire-red light, and her gown melted away, replaced by jagged, shadowy tendrils that coiled and writhed like living snakes. When she spoke again, her voice was a chilling, echoing whisper that filled the space. I am no mere cook, little girl, she hissed. I am a sorceress, a collector of life energy. The food I serve is merely a vessel, a way to siphon the vitality of those foolish enough to indulge. Amina's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. You're destroying them, she said, her voice trembling with anger. They are wasting away because of you. They are nothing more than fuel, Madame Colisa said coldly, her tendrils undulating around her. Their essence sustains me, strengthens me. And now, dear Amina, you will join them. The tendrils shot toward Amina, but she darted to the side, narrowly avoiding them. Her instinct screamed at her to flee, but she forced herself to think. She needed a way to escape and warn the others. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might help. A narrow escape. Madame Colisa's tendrils lashed out again, striking the ground where Amina had stood moments before. The sorceress moved with inhuman speed, her laughter echoing in the cavernous space. You cannot escape, child, she taunted. Your life energy will be mine. Amina spotted a glimmer of light near the doorway, a faint crack where the red glow didn't reach. She darted toward it, her legs burning as she pushed herself to run faster. The tendrils followed, tearing through the air with a sound like shattering glass. As she reached the doorway, Amina grabbed a decorative vase from a nearby pedestal and hurled it at Madame Colisa. The sorceress recoiled slightly, her movement faltering for just a moment, enough for Amina to slip through the door and slam it shut behind her. She stumbled into the square, gasping for breath. Kofi was waiting, his face pale with worry. "What happened? Are you okay?" Amina nodded, though her body trembled with fear and exhaustion. She's not human, Kofi. She's a sorceress. The restaurant, the food, it's all a trap. Kofi's jaw tightened. "We need to warn the others." Amina glanced back at the golden feast, its golden exterior now dull and lifeless. She knew this was only the beginning. Madame Colisa's power was far greater than she had imagined, and the fight to save Misera was just beginning. "We will," Amina said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "But first, we need a plan." The curse. The morning after Amina's confrontation with Madame Colisa, the village of Misera felt heavier than ever. Amina woke with a pounding headache, her body weak and her limbs trembling. She struggled to sit up, but the effort sent waves of dizziness crashing through her. Her skin was pale, her energy drained, and every breath felt labored. Seo entered the room, her eyes filled with worry as she placed a cool cloth on Amina's forehead. "Child, what has happened to you?" she asked, though deep down, she already feared the answer. "I don't know," Amina whispered, her voice hoarse. "It started this morning. I can't even stand." Seo's lips pressed into a thin line, her face shadowed with concern. "This is no ordinary illness," she murmured. "This is her doing. Madame Colisa has cursed you." Amina's eyes widened, fear and anger mixing in her chest. "A curse? But how?" Seo sighed, her hands trembling as she adjusted the cloth on Amina's forehead. "She must have marked you when you entered her domain. Such dark magic is often subtle, creeping into the soul without warning." The signs of the curse. Over the next few days, Amina's condition worsened. Her once strong hands, so skilled at stitching and weaving, were now too weak to lift a needle. Her siblings, Tay and Zora, tried to cheer her up, but their laughter only deepened her despair. The knowledge that she could no longer care for them or earn a living weighed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, the villagers continued to frequent the Golden Feast, their condition deteriorating with each visit. Madame Colisa's presence loomed over Misera like a dark cloud, her influence spreading unchecked. Amina knew she had to stop her, but in her weakened state, the task seemed impossible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Seo sat by Amina's bedside, her expression resolute. "This curse will not take you, child," she said firmly. "There is a way to break it, but it will require great courage." "What can we do?" Amina asked, her voice faint but determined. Seo's eyes glimmered with an ancient wisdom. "We must seek the keeper of the forest." The keeper of the forest. The keeper was a spirit of legend, a guardian of balance and harmony who dwelled deep within the ancient woods that bordered Misera. Few dared to enter the forest, for it was said that the keeper judged all who approached, and only those pure of heart were allowed to live. Despite the risks, Seo was unwavering in her decision. She gathered herbs, offerings, and a small satchel of supplies before setting out into the forest at dawn. Amina, too weak to follow, watched her grandmother disappear into the trees with a mixture of hope and fear. The forest was dense and alive with whispers. The trees seemed to shift and bend, their gnarled branches reaching toward Seo as she walked. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, and the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. Seo clutched the satchel tightly, her heart steady but her steps cautious. After hours of walking, she reached a clearing bathed in golden light. At its center stood the keeper, a towering figure cloaked in vines and moss, with glowing amber eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. The keeper's presence was both comforting and intimidating, radiating an aura of immense power. "Why have you come, elder?" the keeper's voice echoed, deep and resonant, as though the forest itself were speaking. Seo bowed low, presenting the offerings of fruit and herbs. "Great keeper, my granddaughter has been cursed by a sorceress who preys upon our village. I seek your guidance to save her." The keeper tilted its head, considering her words. "This sorceress you speak of, she wields the magic of greed and corruption. Her power is anchored to a sacred amulet hidden within her domain. As long as the amulet exists, her influence will grow." Seo's heart sank. "How can we destroy it?" The keeper's eyes glowed brighter. "The amulet is protected by powerful enchantments. Only someone who has resisted the sorceress's temptations can shatter its hold. Your granddaughter possesses the strength to do this, but she will need aid." Seo's voice trembled. "She is too weak. The curse has drained her." The keeper extended a gnarled hand, and a small vial filled with glowing liquid appeared in its palm. "Take this. It is an elixir of renewal, drawn from the heart of the forest. It will restore her strength, but only for a short time. She must act quickly, for the sorceress will sense her approach." Seo accepted the vial with reverence. "Thank you, keeper. We will not fail." The keeper nodded once, its form dissolving into the golden light. The forest seemed to exhale, the tension lifting as Seo made her way back to Mizera, preparing for the final battle. When Seo returned, Amina was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. Seo knelt beside her, holding the vial to her lips. "Drink this, child," she said softly. "It will give you the strength you need." Amina hesitated but trusted her grandmother implicitly. She drank the glowing liquid, its warmth spreading through her body like a flame. Within moments, the color returned to her cheeks, and the weakness in her limbs began to fade. She sat up, her eyes bright with newfound determination. "What did you find out?" Amina asked. Seo explained everything, the amulet, its enchantments, and the danger that lay ahead. Amina listened intently, her resolve hardening with every word. She knew the task would be perilous, but the thought of freeing her village from Madame Colissa's grip fueled her courage. Kofi arrived soon after, his expression grim but resolute. "You're not doing this alone," he said firmly. "We'll go together." Amina smiled faintly, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you, Kofi." As the sun set over Mizera, the three of them gathered their supplies and prepared to face Madame Colissa once more. The forest keeper had given them a chance, but the fight to destroy the amulet and the sorceress's power would test their strength, courage, and unity like never before. The battle for Mizera was about to begin. The plan. The night in Mizera was thick with tension, the air alive with the anticipation of what was to come. Inside Amina's modest home, the flickering light of a single oil lamp illuminated the faces of Amina, Kofi, and Seo as they huddled together. The room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of papers and the soft murmurs of their conversation. The keeper's warning about the amulet was fresh in their minds. Destroying it would be the key to breaking Madame Colissa's hold on the village. But the task ahead was daunting. The restaurant was no mere building, and Madame Colissa no ordinary foe. Laying the foundation. "We can't do this alone," Kofi said, his voice firm. "If we are going to face Madame Colissa, we need more people. The villagers who've suffered because of her, they have a stake in this fight too." Amina nodded, her face pale but determined. Though her body still bore the effects of the curse, the elixir from the keeper had given her enough strength to press on. "But how do we convince them?" she asked. "They're already under her spell." Seo, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Not all of them are fully lost. There are some who still have a sliver of will left. They will need to be reminded of who they are, of what they are fighting for. Kofi leaned forward, his expression resolute. I know a few people who might help. Adoma, for one. She's been going to the restaurant less lately, and I've seen her wandering the fields as though trying to shake off the spell. And they are stunned. He's always been skeptical of Madame Colisa, even if he's eaten there once or twice. Good, Seo said. Gather them. Explain what we've learned. We must act quickly before Madame Colisa senses our intentions. Kofi nodded and stood, his broad shoulders set with determination. I'll meet you both back here by dawn. The village's hidden resolve. While Kofi set out to recruit allies, Amina and Seo focused on preparing for the confrontation. Seo gathered herbs and charms she had crafted over the years, creating protective talismans to shield them from Madame Colisa's magic. Amina, the weekend, helped where she could, her love for her family and village driving her forward. As dawn broke, Kofi returned with a small group of villagers. Adoma was among them, her eyes tired but flickering with defiance. Turned, the village farmer, carried a heavy staff, his jaw clenched in determination. There were others too, men and women who had suffered under Madame Colisa's influence but now sought to reclaim their lives. We are ready to help, Adoma said, her voice shaky but resolute. Whatever it takes to free the village. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight of her illness. Thank you. I know this won't be easy, but together, we can break her hold on Mizera. The plan takes shape. The group gathered around Seo's table as she laid out a rough map of the Golden Feast, sketched from memory and Amina's observations. The amulet will likely be hidden somewhere Madame Colisa considers sacred, Seo explained. A place where her magic is strongest. The kitchen, Kofi said immediately. It's the heart of the restaurant, and it's where most of the enchantments seem to originate. Seo nodded. It's a likely place. But Madame Colisa will not leave it unguarded. She will have spells and wards in place to protect it. That's where I come in, Adoma said, her hands trembling but her voice firm. I've been inside enough times to know where the back entrances are. If we split into two groups, one can create a distraction while the other searches for the amulet. It's risky, Tan said, gripping his staff tightly. But it might be our best chance. Amina glanced around the room, her gaze settling on each face in turn. We'll need to move quickly. Once we find the amulet, we destroy it immediately, no hesitation. Seo placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. And remember, child, the amulet will be heavily protected. The closer you get to it, the more Madame Colisa will sense your presence. You must stay focused. Strength through struggle. As the group finalized their plans, Amina felt a pang of doubt. Her body was still weak, and every movement took more effort than it should. But when she thought of her siblings, their laughter and innocence, a fire reignited in her heart. She couldn't let them grow up in a village overshadowed by darkness. She couldn't let Madame Colisa win. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered one last time. Seo handed out the protective talismans she had crafted, each one imbued with her prayers and strength. These will shield you from her spells, she said. But only for a short time. Use them wisely. Kofi placed a reassuring hand on Amina's shoulder. We've got this, he said. We'll do it together. Amina smiled faintly, drawing strength from his words. Together. Into the shadows. As darkness fell over Mizera, the group moved silently through the village, their path lit only by the faint glow of the moon. The golden feast loomed ahead, its golden walls shimmering unnaturally in the dim light. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an invisible energy that made every step more difficult. Amina's heart pounded as they approached, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to falter now. Her love for her family and village had brought her this far, and it would carry her the rest of the way. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, the talisman around her neck glowing faintly. Behind her, Kofi, Seo, and the villagers followed, their determination shining like a beacon in the night. The battle to free Mizera had begun. The battle. The night air was thick with tension as the villagers gathered at the edge of the square, their silhouettes blending into the shadows cast by the moonlight. The golden feast loomed before them, its golden walls shimmering with an unnatural glow. A faint, eerie hum emanated from the building, sending shivers down Amina's spine. She stood at the front of the group, Kofi by her side, Seo just behind her. The talisman around Amina's neck glowed faintly, a small but steady light against the oppressive darkness. Despite her weakened state, she held her head high, drawing strength from the determination of those around her. "This is our moment," Amina said, her voice quiet but firm. "We fight not just for ourselves but for everyone Madame Kolisa has taken from us." The villagers nodded, their faces resolute. Kofi gripped his hammer tightly, his eyes locked on the restaurant. "Let's end this," he said. Storming the restaurant. The group moved as one, slipping through the shadows until they reached the restaurant's entrance. Adoma and Tond led the way to the back entrance, their familiarity with the building guiding the villagers safely inside. The once bustling dining hall was eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of roasted spices and something darker, more sinister. As they entered, the glow of the restaurant's walls intensified, and a low, echoing laugh filled the air. Madame Kolisa stepped into view, her golden robes billowing as if moved by an unseen wind. Her amber eyes gleamed with malice, and a cruel smile played on her lips. "So," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "you've come to destroy what you cannot understand. How quaint. You've taken enough from us," Amina said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled at her sides. "Your magic ends tonight." Madame Kolisa's smile widened. "Brave words for a girl so weak. Do you really think you can stop me?" Before Amina could respond, Madame Kolisa raised her hands, and the room erupted in chaos. Dark, shadowy figures emerged from the walls, their forms shifting and writhing as they lunged toward the villagers. The creatures moved with unnatural speed, their red eyes glowing like embers in the dim light. The villagers fight back. The villagers fought bravely, their makeshift weapons clashing against the shadowy creatures. Kofi swung his hammer with precision, shattering one of the figures into wisps of smoke. Adoma used her agility to evade the creature's attacks, her sharp knife slicing through the darkness. Even Seo, despite her age, stood firm, using her protective talismans to ward off the shadows. Amina, though still weak, used the wisdom her grandmother had imparted. She focused on the talisman around her neck, its glow intensifying as she chanted the keeper's blessings. The light from the talisman seemed to repel the creatures, creating a small safe zone around her. But for every creature the villagers destroyed, another took its place. The restaurant pulsed with a dark energy, feeding the shadows and strengthening Madame Kolisa's power. Amina's confrontation. As the battle raged on, Amina locked eyes with Madame Kolisa. The sorceress stood at the far end of the dining hall, her expression one of amusement and disdain. Amina knew that the fight would not end until she confronted her directly. Summoning all her courage, Amina pushed through the chaos, weaving between the shadowy figures as they clawed at her. The talisman's light guided her path, shielding her from the worst of the creature's attacks. When she finally reached Madame Kolisa, the sorceress raised an eyebrow, her smile twisting into a sneer. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," she said. "But persistence won't save you." Amina clenched her fist, her body trembling with fear and determination. "You've underestimated me," she said. "You think you can take everything from us, but you're wrong. You don't understand the strength of this village, of its people. Madame Colisa laughed, a sharp, chilling sound. Strength. Foolish girl, I have drained your people of their strength. Their lives belong to me. Amina stepped closer, the glow of her talisman growing brighter. You may have taken their strength, but you never take their spirit. And you never take mine. The turning point. Enraged, Madame Colisa raised her hands, summoning a wave of dark energy that surged toward Amina. The force was overwhelming, crackling with raw power, but Amina held her ground. She gripped the talisman tightly, focusing on the keeper's blessing and the love she held for her family and village. The talisman erupted with a blinding light, cutting through the darkness and striking Madame Colisa directly. The sorceress screamed, her form flickering as the light burned away at her shadowy tendrils. No! Madame Colisa shrieked, her voice filled with fury and fear. This cannot be. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. Your power comes from deception and fear. But we are stronger than that. Madame Colisa staggered, her form beginning to crumble under the talisman's light. You think you've won, she hissed. The amulet still binds me. As long as it exists, my power will endure. Amina's heart pounded as she realized what she had to do. The amulet was the source of Madame Colisa's power, and destroying it was the only way to end her reign. With one final, determined look, Amina turned toward the restaurant's kitchen, the glow of the talisman lighting her path. The fight continues. As Amina raced toward the kitchen, Kofi and the villagers continued to fight the shadowy creatures. The air was filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and the villagers' shouts of defiance. Though they were outnumbered, their determination never wavered. Kofi! Amina shouted over the din, hold them off a little longer. I'm going for the amulet. Go! Kofi yelled, his hammer smashing into another creature. We'll handle this. Amina pushed forward, her body fueled by sheer willpower. She knew that the fate of Misera, and everyone she loved, depended on her success. With every step, she drew closer to the heart of the golden feast, where the source of Madame Colisa's power awaited. The amulet's destruction. The chaos of the battle echoed behind Amina as she pushed through the heavy kitchen doors of the golden feast. The once pristine room now felt alive with dark energy, its golden surfaces pulsating faintly with an unnatural glow. Every step sent chills through her, as though the building itself was warning her to turn back. Her grip tightened on the glowing talisman around her neck. Guided by the keeper's blessing and her grandmother's wisdom, Amina scanned the room for any sign of the amulet. Her heart pounded as she noticed a faint trail of shimmering light on the floor, leading toward a door at the back of the kitchen. The secret chamber. The door was locked, but Amina's determination outweighed any obstacle. She grabbed a heavy iron pot from the counter and struck the lock repeatedly until it shattered. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Amina hesitated for only a moment before descending. The air grew colder as she moved deeper into the secret chamber, the faint hum of energy growing louder with each step. The staircase ended in a small, dimly lit room. At its center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested the amulet, a shimmering black stone set in an intricate gold frame, pulsating with an ominous red light. Amina's breath caught in her throat. The amulet radiated power, its presence overwhelming, yet she knew this was the source of Madame Colisa's strength. Destroying it would be the key to saving Misera. As she stepped toward the pedestal, the shadows in the room coalesced, forming the figure of Madame Colisa. Her golden robes were tattered, her eyes burning with desperation and fury. You found it, Madame Colisa said, her voice a dangerous mix of mockery and pleading. You are clever, Amina. I underestimated you. The plea. Amina stood her ground, her eyes locked on the sorceress. It's over, Madame Colisa. This ends now. But the sorceress only laughed, a sound both chilling and hollow. Over. Oh, my dear, it's far from over. You don't understand the power you hold in your hands. That amulet is not just my source of strength, it could be yours as well. Amina froze as Madame Colissa took a step closer, her voice softening. Think about it, Amina. With the power of the amulet, you could have everything you've ever wanted. No more struggling to feed your family. No more sleepless nights wondering how to make ends meet. Riches, power, security, all of it could be yours. Amina's heart wavered. The promise of a better life for her siblings, for herself, was tempting. She thought of Tay and Zora, their innocent faces lighting up when she brought home even the smallest treats. Could she really refuse such an opportunity? Madame Colissa's eyes gleamed as she sensed Amina's hesitation. You could save them, Amina. Save yourself. All I ask is that you return the amulet to me. The decision. Amina's fingers brushed against the talisman around her neck, its steady glow cutting through her doubt. She closed her eyes, hearing her grandmother's voice in her mind, not everything that tempts you is worth having. When she opened her eyes, they were filled with resolve. You're wrong, Madame Colissa. The power you offer isn't salvation, it's a curse. I won't let you destroy my village. Madame Colissa's expression twisted into rage, her shadowy form growing larger as the room darkened. Foolish girl, she roared. You don't know what you're rejecting. Without me, your people will suffer. They will return to their miserable, insignificant lives. Amina stepped forward, her voice steady. They would rather live honestly than be enslaved by your lies. Destroying the amulet. With one swift motion, Amina snatched the amulet from the pedestal. Its energy surged through her, a searing heat that threatened to overwhelm her. The whispers of temptation grew louder, clawing at her resolve, but she held tight, focusing on the love she had for her family and her village. She raised the amulet high, gripping the talisman in her other hand. Keeper of the forest, she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. Give me strength. The talisman's glow intensified, its light engulfing the amulet. The dark whispers turned into agonized screams as the amulet cracked, its surface fracturing like glass. Amina cried out as the energy within the amulet erupted in a brilliant explosion of light, throwing her backward. When the light faded, the amulet was no more. In its place were shards of lifeless stone scattered across the floor. Madame Colissa's defeat. Madame Colissa let out a piercing scream, her shadowy form writhing as the destruction of the amulet tore through her. No, she howled, her voice filled with fury and despair. You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. But her words were hollow. Her form began to dissolve, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. She glared at Amina one final time, her eyes blazing with hatred. This isn't over, girl. You may have won today, but darkness always finds a way. With that, Madame Colissa vanished, leaving only silence in her wake. Freedom restored. Amina staggered to her feet, her body trembling from the effort. She made her way back upstairs, clutching the talisman tightly. When she emerged into the dining hall, she found the villagers standing in stunned silence. The shadowy creatures were gone, and the oppressive energy that had filled the restaurant had vanished. Kofi rushed to her side, his face a mix of relief and worry. Amina, are you okay? She nodded, though her legs felt weak. It's done. The amulet is destroyed. As the villagers slowly realized what had happened, their pale faces began to regain color. Their eyes cleared, and their movements became more natural. The spell that had bound them was broken. Sale stepped forward, her eyes glistening with pride and relief. You've done it, child, she said softly. You've saved us all. The aftermath. The golden feast crumbled that very night, its golden walls collapsing into ruins as though the building itself had been tied to Madame Colissa's magic. The villagers gathered in the square, their spirits renewed as they worked together to rebuild their lives. Though Amina was exhausted, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced the darkness and won, not just for herself, but for her family, her village, and the future they all shared. A new dawn. The morning after Madame Colissa's defeat, the village of Mizara awoke to a scene of transformation. The golden feast, once the centerpiece of temptation and darkness, lay in ruins. Its golden walls had crumbled to dust, leaving behind only fragments of its once intimidating structure. The oppressive energy that had hung over the village like a storm cloud was gone, replaced by a gentle breeze that carried with it the scent of fresh earth and freedom. Amina stood at the edge of the square, gazing at the rubble. Her body was still weak from the battle, but her heart was light. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face, and for the first time in weeks, she breathed deeply, free of fear. The village rebuilt. Word of Madame Colissa's defeat spread quickly. The villagers who had been under her spell began to regain their vitality. Their faces, once pale and hollow, now glowed with renewed energy. Many gathered in the square to thank Amina and the others who had fought alongside her. Amina, Adoma said, her voice filled with gratitude. You saved us. I don't know how we'll ever repay you. You don't need to, Amina replied with a soft smile. We did this together. It's not just my victory, it's ours. Kofi, standing nearby, grinned. Still, I think you deserve a little celebration. After all, you did destroy an ancient, enchanted amulet and banish a sorceress. That's not something you see every day. The villagers laughed, their spirits lifting as they began to see hope for the future. Together, they worked to clear the rubble of the golden feast, reclaiming the space it had once occupied. Though the restaurant's allure had caused so much pain, its destruction symbolized a new beginning. Amina's recovery. For the first time in weeks, Amina felt her strength returning. The curse Madame Colissa had placed on her had lifted, and the warmth of the keeper's blessing still lingered in her heart. Her siblings, Tay and Zora, clung to her side, their laughter filling the air as they played in the square. Seo watched her granddaughter with pride. You've grown, child, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Not just in strength, but in spirit. You've reminded this village of the power of courage and unity. Amina looked at her grandmother, her eyes glistening. I couldn't have done it without you. Your stories, your wisdom, they were my guide. Seo smiled, reaching out to take Amina's hand. And now, it's your turn to guide others. A new venture. In the weeks that followed, Amina began to dream of how she could use her experience to bring the village together. The space where the golden feast once stood was now an open lot, a blank slate waiting to be filled with new life. One morning, as Amina sat with Kofi and Seo under the shade of a large tree, she shared her idea. What if we opened a place where everyone in the village could gather? A place with simple, honest food, not to tempt, but to nourish. Kofi raised an eyebrow. You're talking about a restaurant? Not like the golden feast, Amina clarified quickly. Something different. A small eatery where people can share meals and stories. Where we can remember what's important, community, kindness, and working together. Seo nodded approvingly. It sounds like a beautiful idea, child. A place to heal and rebuild. The Eatery of Hope. With the help of the villagers, Amina's vision came to life. They worked together to build a cozy, open-air eatery with wooden tables and colorful cloths that Amina had sewn herself. A simple sign hung above the entrance, the gatherer's table. When the eatery opened, it was an immediate success, not because of lavish meals or magical allure, but because it represented everything the village had fought for. Families gathered to share meals, farmers brought fresh produce to contribute, and laughter once again echoed through the square. Amina worked tirelessly, but this time, it was with joy in her heart. She prepared hearty stews, freshly baked bread, and fruit preserves using ingredients sourced from the village. Each dish was a celebration of Misera's resilience and unity. The celebration of Amina. One evening, the villagers surprised Amina with a celebration in her honor. They gathered at the gatherers' table, filling the space with music, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Kofi stood to speak, raising a mug of freshly brewed tea. To Amina, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. For her courage, her kindness, and her strength. She showed us that even in the darkest times, light can prevail. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Amina, though overwhelmed, felt a deep sense of gratitude. She stood to address them, her voice steady but full of emotion. This isn't just my victory, she said. It belongs to all of us. Together, we prove that greed and deception will always lead to downfall, but courage and unity can overcome even the darkest forces. The moral of the story. As life returned to normal in Misera, Amina's eatery became a symbol of hope and resilience. The lessons learned from their battle with Madame Kolisa remained etched in the hearts of the villagers. They had faced greed, temptation, and fear, but through courage, wisdom, and unity, they had reclaimed their village. And as the sun set over Misera, casting a golden glow over the hills and fields, Amina stood at the doorway of the gatherers' table, watching the villagers share a meal together. She smiled, knowing that they had not only survived but had grown stronger. The moral of their story was clear: greed and deception may hold power for a time, but the strength of a united community will always triumph in the end. Oh,